Hello, it's Georgetta Gancars here, and I wanted to do a video today for my students and just to basically tell you what a wash is. And we're going to do some examples, even though we've done them in the studio. You'll be able to try the washes at home. You'll be able to save the video for a future reference if you forget what a wash is. So the first thing is, what is a wash? And a wash is basically paint, and to the paint we have to add something to dilute it, to make it transparent. So what do? If we're adding watercolors, we would add water. If we're using acrylics, we would also add water. And if we're using oils, we could use turpenoid and linseed oil, or we could just use an oil, or if we were doing a glaze in a wash, or we could just use straight turpenoid. So today, for the purpose of the video, I'm just going to discuss acrylics. I will do a separate video on watercolors and oils, but this is about just how to do a wash with acrylics, so we would be using just water. And the first thing you want to do is you kind of want to have your space set up where you have your brushes, you have a glass of water. So I kind of have this very long glass. You don't have to have one that size. You can have a smaller glass as long as you can submerge your brushes into the glass without a problem. And you want to have your palette. That's what you're painting on. I am painting on my palette here. It's all white, and I do want to say I prefer using a white palette because I can see the colors better. They do sell palettes that are brown, or I've even seen ones that are gray, a little bit off-white, but the whiter one is better because you can see more of the true colors and they're not competing with the palette. The other thing you need to have your brushes ready, and I will do a separate video on the different types of brushes that you should be using with your paints. But in this case, we will be using a large brush, a mop brush. We'll also be using later a filbert. And again, I will do a whole nother video about the brushes. And then you kind of need your easel. So I kind of have my easel here. Oops, a little dark here. And my canvas. And my canvas is kind of pre-gessoed. You can stretch your own. This is a store-bought canvas. I'll do another video on stretching canvas. But for now, we're going to use this canvas here. And the thing is, when you're getting set up, you also want to have your palette knives. Now, I wrote a whole book on palette knives. I teach a class also on palette knife painting. But for this class, you will basically just kind of need a regular palette knife. This is more like a standard large palette knife, and they do come in different sizes, or medium size knife. And I'm not really going to go into all the sizes now. I'm just saying just you need a standard size knife, and you need that for mixing your colors. And you're going to mix it, I'll show you, back and forth, kind of like if you were almost putting icing on a cake. So there are two different types of washes that you can do. The first one, I'm just going to use all blue, and the blue that I'm using is ultramarine blue. So I'm taking out, and I'll show you, I'm taking out a tiny bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm kind of putting it there on my palette. And I give myself enough space, so if I was going to add another color, I would add the other color about 2 inches apart from the first color, so I would have enough space to use my palette knife and mix. And if you don't have a large palette, you can use a white sheet of paper that's plain, double it with wax paper, tape it down to your flat surface, and you can use that, and you'll be painting on top of using the wax paper with the white sheet underneath as your palette. And you can throw up the wax paper and just put a new piece of wax paper on top. I wrote a book. I love mixing colors so much. I wrote a book on mixing colors. I kind of recommend it. And I also wrote another book. It's an instructional textbook, and it's under my copyright name, The Painting for Everyone. And it's just basically a step-by-step how to do paintings using color theory, all of the brushes that you would need, your materials, to stretching a canvas, to even going outside and painting plain air, to picking the perfect easel. So let's start now, and I'm going to start with my wash. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to have a really good brush. So when I'm doing a wash and I want to cover the whole canvas, I usually have a large brush. And you'll notice how this brush kind of comes to, looks like a square brush. It's not a round brush. And they have different brushes that are, you know, bristle hair, which is a little bit of a rougher texture, and then we have a synthetic hair, which is a little bit softer texture. And you can see by touching them. Usually the bristle hair brushes, they're made from hog hair. So the first step you want to do is you kind of want to submerge, and I'm going to do different strokes with different brushes, so you can see. I'm kind of going to submerge my brush in the water here, and then, especially if it's a new brush, you kind of want to do that ahead of time. You can maybe even soak it for a couple of minutes, because sometimes it's very stiff and you have to get it a little bit loose. And then I'm dipping it on my rag. Now this isn't really necessary every time that you do it, but until you get into the idea of painting, and if you're a beginner, it's a good process to have, because if your brush is too wet and you put it on the canvas, what's going to happen is you're eventually going to have strokes that you don't like, and you're going to be able to see them, and you want the transition to be very, very smooth. So it's really a good habit to kind of wipe your brush off. And then what I did was I kind of picked up I put my brush here into my paint, and I saturated the ends of my brush. If you can see, I'm holding it up here so you can see my whole brush is not, the whole bristles are not saturated, only the end, and you can see the tip. And then what I'm doing is I'm kind of dabbing that off. You can dab it on your palette, or you can dab it on your towel. But you want to dab it off just so you don't have a lot of thick paint on that brush. And then what I'm doing is I'm starting at the edge of the canvas, and I'm holding it for you so you can see, and I'm applying some kind of pressure, and I'm moving it from right to left, and I'm kind of sweeping it and stroking it and going it across where it has a very, very light transition, and I can move it across. If I press really hard, too hard, you'll see those strokes, and